In the house, Chris. Is he here? There he is. How are we doing? Good man. So Chris is going to talk to us about the massive loop, which seems so useful, and yet I haven't actually used it yet. So I'm looking forward to this to see how you are, how people are using it already. I know it's really early days, but that's what we like here, to get in on the ground with technology that's only just released. So Chris has probably got the biggest profile I've ever seen, but let's just say he is awesome at Teams. I think that's kind of where we need to be. I'm a big fan, and this is probably my go-to blog site would be Chris Hoard's. So Chris, over to you.
Thanks ever so much, Sharon. Let me just get kind of sharing and getting things kind of underway. So here we go. So, it's always a pleasure to be here. I think this is about the second or third time I've maybe spoken at the user group, and it's always really exciting to be back. I can tell a bit more about myself later on and kind of distribute the details, but I want to get in and really talk about Loop, because I know that I've got about a half an hour slot, and this time around I'm trying to cram a 45-minute into a 30. I think I can do it. I've been speaking on security, so I'm kind of very much focused today with getting this done. So this is Hyperloop, components in Teams and now Outlook, and it's very much aligned to what Sharon was saying, because Sharon was saying I've never actually used it yet, but it's something that I want to get into. And it's distinguishing Microsoft Loop about whether something is ready to use today or whether it is at the moment just hype. So what to expect from this session? We're going to have a little recap on what the Microsoft vision of Loop is and how we use it in Microsoft Teams, because that was the first place it was released. We're then going to look at Loop components in Outlook. So it's now come out in the last few weeks into public preview in Outlook. And then we're going to look at its benefits and challenges. And the outcome today is to try and get a better understanding if our organization is ready to use Microsoft Loop or whether it's too underdeveloped and it's all hype and it's going to be something down the road that makes a lot more sense. So this session is going to be a level 2 to 300 session because it requires a little bit of knowledge about Teams and Outlook. The scope is going to concentrate on the Loop components element, the demo, around about 30%, but just a caveat that with these sessions, Loop, like Microsoft Teams, changes rapidly. So what you see today might not be the same in, let's say, about 4 to 6 weeks time. So let's go and play the video. This was the video, the marketing video that was at the Loop launch, which was in Microsoft Ignite at the end of last year. I just want to make sure that I've got the sound on. Let's go. So that was the kind of the marketing video, and when we all saw it, we were like, wow, this is going to be, a great application to use. And the first thing that we have to do is really to kind of move past this and to kind of deconstruct exactly what Microsoft Loop is. And here's the description. Microsoft Loop is a new app that combines a powerful and flexible canvas with portable components that stay in sync and move freely across Microsoft 365 apps. Now, the two insights that we can glean from this, we can almost split this into two parts. Number one, it's going to be a collaborative app experience similar to Whiteboard. In other words, it's designed for people to collaborate together. It's not an application that's going to be siloed or kind of with a single purpose in mind. This is for people to kind of work together. This is the new theme of Microsoft, which is collaborative apps. On the second hand, these are going to be items that you can surface across other Microsoft 365 apps. In other words, as you saw in there at the end of the marketing video, you'll be able to surface them in Microsoft Teams, in Microsoft Outlook, in the Office apps, and so forth. It's going to be an app, it's going to be a loop right the way through all of the other apps, hence the name Microsoft Loop. Now, Microsoft Loop, the service, is going to be broken down into 3 parts. One of them are here today and 2 other parts are not here today yet. So Microsoft Loop is today very much unfinished. The first part, and what we're going to demonstrate in both Teams and Outlook, are these, which are loop components. Microsoft described them as atomic units of productivity. What does that mean? If you have a look at the list here, it could mean a paragraph, a text, a table, a list, a link. It is these individual atomic components. If we think about that word atomic, atom, it's a part of something that we're going to be able to take and then surface up through other Microsoft 365 applications. Now, what these actually are is, in terms of a physical object, is they are fluid files that are actually stored in OneDrive. So if I jump, for example, into my demo environment and go into OneDrive, this is actually what they are. And if I open this up, you can see that the loop component here is actually a bullet list. And I'll show you how we create them in a moment. Moving back, okay, past components, so that's 1/3 of the service. Those loop components, okay, are going to be organized into pages. But to give you an example of those components, let's take the loop component on the left-hand side. That's a kind of a paragraph of text. If you can imagine that as that fluid file, as that object, you'll be able to surface that into a Teams chat, into an email, into a document. At the same time, if you amend the loop component in one of those applications, it'll change it across all of the applications. So it's kind of almost working with an app within all different sorts of apps. As said, all these loop components will be organized into pages. So this is a future functionality. This is not here yet. Whilst we've got components in Teams and in Outlook, and we'll have components in other applications in the future, there is no way today in order to be able to organize them. This is Microsoft Loop Pages, which is going to be released in the future. If you can imagine a page like a whiteboard in which you can pin all of these different loop components and organize them thematically along with other things such as links and files, they're going to be a flexible canvas. Here is the kind of the screenshot that Microsoft have provided as to what a loop page looks like. It looks very much like a whiteboard. At the top, we have an image. That's going to be a loop component. Here we see several paragraphs. They are also loop components, but you can organize those loop components in pages. That makes it very easy to go to a page, grab a loop component, and then surface it in an app elsewhere. Think if you're in a marketing team and you want that perfect paragraph to put into a document or put into a Microsoft Teams chat, you can go to the page, grab the component, and then put it in an application that you want to use it in. Those collaborative cursors that are very kind of characteristic of the whiteboard, that shows you that many people can work on these loop pages at the same time. Hence, it is a collaborative app, very much like the whiteboard. So these loop components will be organized into loop pages, and the loop pages will be organized into workspaces. So workspaces is like a top level organization principle whereby you can have your loop page together with a number of other resources such as OneNote files or PDFs or kind of Excels or notepads. And you can have the workspace that is there for a team, for example, or you can organize those workspaces thematically. What you will also know about this concept shop, because workspaces aren't here either, is that you see that all these workspaces that you have access to are organized through a dedicated Microsoft Loop application. Now, this concept is on Windows 11. This app, this Microsoft Loop app, is probably, I would imagine, a progressive web app similar to Microsoft Lists. But you can see that what we're kind of already missing today, the stuff that is coming in the future, is all the stuff that organizes these loop components. So today, if you wanted to start using Microsoft Loop, you're only using 1/3 of the service. And of course, it's not rolled out across all applications. So from an architecture perspective, it's quite simple from those designs to see what Microsoft Loop will be like. You'll components, these atomic kind of articles of productivity. You will be able to surface them through your applications that you use within Microsoft 365. They will be stored in OneDrive, which is your personal storage. They will be organized into loop pages, those loop pages that are organized into workspaces, and then the loop app will give you access to all of that. So, you know, it's pretty easy to understand once you get to grips with Microsoft Loop and you kind of study those concepts. At the time of the release, when Microsoft was, you know, Loop was released back in November, it was released just to Teams, and within Teams, just to internal private chats. So you can have a one-to-one chat, or you can have a group chat. You can also surface the Loop components into meetings. We're going to demo that in just a moment. In the future, lots of different apps we're going to see Microsoft Loop surfaced in. We're going to see them surfaced in OneNote. We're going to see them surfaced, as we will show today, in Outlook, but they will also appear in the Office app, in Whiteboard, and also Dynamics 365 as well. So Microsoft have big plans for this. It's going to get rolled out across the whole Microsoft 365 ecosystem, but as well as being unfinished, because only 1/3 has been kind of brought out into the, you know, kind of production environments today, it is also a fact that it's not rolled out to all the other Microsoft 365 applications. It's just Teams within a narrow context and Outlook within private preview. So let's get on to the demo. Let's have a look about how we're using these Loop components today. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create one of them inside our environment. So here we are inside Microsoft Teams. You can see here that I'm in the private chat section where we can use Loop components. And here I am within a group chat, and within that we have Vesku, and we also have Adam as well. I am in or logged in as Vesku. I'm also logged in as Chris at the same time, so I can show you how we can collaborate together. See that this is a loop already been pre-created, but I'm going to start creating another one. And you can see that right under the chat box that we have the loop component icon that is right there. So the first thing we do in order to be able to create a loop component is come down to the loop components icon and click on it. And it will ask us to choose what kind of loop component that we want to create. We can choose from that bulleted list, a paragraph, a table, a task list, and Microsoft are adding to these all of the time. I'm going to choose a bulleted list. I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to call this bullet list 2. And then I'm going to put some items in this bullet list in order to work on. So item 1, item 2, item 3, and so forth. Now, if I go back as Vesku, okay, and I go back into the chat, you will see that there's nothing there whilst I'm working on it. But, okay, just going to reshare my screen because I've got this kind of slight bug in it whereby, there we go. If I come back in, 2 moments, just stop presenting a second. There we go. If I share it back. So if I publish that loop component now into the group chat, you can see there we go. And then if I go in as Vesku, you can see that Vesku can work on this and update and modify the loop component in real time. So we can collaborate on these atomic units of productivity. We can collaborate together in real time on lists, on task items, on paragraphs of text. That is the whole kind of point of loop components. We can work on them together collaboratively, but also as well surface them in many different applications. Now, when I create this loop component in Teams, it also creates it as well in office.com. So if I click on this link right here, I will not only be able to access it through Teams, I can also access it through office.com too. So anyone who that loop component has been shared with will be able to access it through the app itself or through office.com. So creating loop components working and collaborating on loop components and modifying them in real time is very, very easy in order to be able to do. And that's what Microsoft want. It's based upon the Fluid framework. They want this kind of seamless, frictionless collaboration between several people within inside the organization. Now, in addition to that, okay, how do we surface a loop component? So you saw me create a loop component, and you saw me as well be able to modify that loop component, but how do we surface it elsewhere? How do we surface it, for example, in another chat? Well, that's very easy too. So on the right-hand corner here, you can see I've got something that says copy link. All I do is click on the copy link so that it's copied. There'll be a little tick there. I can come into another chat within Microsoft Teams, and it can be another private chat, group chat, wherever I want to surface it. And then I will just paste it into the chat. And there we go. You can see that the loop component has been pasted in, and I can now start working with Vesku directly on this loop component, and I can work on it in different chats, in different places at the same time. It's this link here, the loop component link, which is really key to everything. Because if I wanted to surface this in Outlook, which we can start using it in Outlook now, I can do the same thing. So if I create a new message in Outlook, I do the same thing. I copy it in, and there we go. So I've surfaced it in another application. This is awesome. And if I were to email somebody now, and they've got permissions on that loop component, we can collaborate in different contexts within the flow of our work. In addition to being able to modify and surface it in different applications, we've also got the ability to pin either within Teams or within, kind of within Outlook. So if in Teams, if, I wanted to pin that to the top of the chat, to the top of the group chat or top of the private chat, I click the three little buttons, which are the more options, and then I pin it. So it's easily accessible to everyone within that group chat. If I wanted to search for those loop components, what's the best way to search? Today, probably the best way to search for loop components is to do so through office.com. So when I first log in to office.com, okay, I just go to the home page here. They will appear in the quick access, but also as well, if I wanted to search, I can do so through the search. Also as well, if I kind of, go to the kind of the detailed search, so if I kind of put in loop, I can then find it there as well. There is even a defined filter. If I go to my content and then click on the filter, I can also as well show all the loop components that I have access to within my tenant. So there's other stuff we can do. We probably haven't got time to kind of really dig into the detail of the extent of what we can do with loop components within Teams. But I think you kind of get the idea just from that short demonstration that they're designed to be used in the flow of the work, to be able to surface anywhere. It's about creating these things ad hoc on the fly and being able to surface them wherever we need. Even though we haven't got pages, and even though we haven't got the kind of the workspaces at this moment in time, we can still use the components, whether we want to bring up the, think about how much time we can save by creating things that we can replicate again and again within Teams conversations or within the emails. Now, considering all those things, we have to consider, the kind of the challenges and what it can't do today. So there are some prerequisites in order to be able to use loop components in Teams. Number one, we need a SharePoint license and a SharePoint that ultimately controls the loop components. You can see set_spo tenant is loop enabled true. By PowerShell, you can turn loop on or off. Most people will have loop enabled equals true because Microsoft have set it to on by default, but a user needs to have a SharePoint license, both because SharePoint controls it, but also because these fluid files, these loop components are stored within OneDrive. So when I created it within Teams, if I now go within, my OneDrive, you can now see that the fluid file has been created. The problem here is that it's not created at the top level, it's created within the Microsoft Teams chat folder if I create it in Microsoft Teams. So as a user, I need to have a SharePoint license for both SharePoint from a controls perspective, but also OneDrive, because that is where the fluid files are actually stored. If I don't have, if OneDrive is disabled, then I will not be able to use Loop components. In addition, I need a Teams license, and within Teams today, I can use it in the desktop, in web, in mobile. We've also had confirmed reports that it can now be used in Linux and VDI. So if you're using Azure Virtual Desktop, you can use it there too. In terms of the limits, what we have to be aware of, today we can only use them within private chats. That's a problem because of two things. Number one, we can't use them in channels, which means we can't use Loop components in Teams where a lot of people collaborate with other people inside their organization. In addition, we can't use them in federated chats. We can only use them internally. We can't use them with people outside of our organization. So if we think about how we use Teams, we are using private chats, we're using Teams, we're using federated chat with inside and outside the organization. We're limited in a number of use cases to use those Loop components. In terms of where that fluid file is stored, having talked to admins, they're not happy that this stuff is stored in private storage for, kind of many different reasons, but it's not even stored in a top level of OneDrive. It's stored within a Teams chat folder. So you actually have to dig into your OneDrive to find the fluid file. It also has a couple of other limits. In terms of creation, you can only create them in the app itself. In other words, you can only create them, Loop components, within Microsoft Teams. You cannot create them through office.com. So there's no centralized place to create those Loop components and then surface them. Maybe there's something that will be corrected in the future. And also as well, if we're looking at things from a code perspective, Loop components don't support HTML or Markdown. You have some basic formatting today, but you can't make it really rich as, the audience today would expect. One of the positives and one of the things that Vesku and I and others have been trying to do is we've been trying to use loops within the Power Platform. This is a bit of a nod to Sharon. We've been using them within Power Automate. Now, let me just give. Oops, sorry.
I just said very cool.
Yeah, I mean, very simply, don't get me wrong, I'm nowhere near on your guys' level in order to be able to use them. But I just want to give you a kind of a really, really simple example. So imagine that I create a loop component and I want to review that loop component each and every week. There are reasons. I've got a paragraph of text. I might want to review it on a periodic basis to make small changes of it so I can use it in Teams chats or I can use it within my Outlook emails. And I want to periodically review that. So as you can see here, I've mocked up a flow whereby I set a scheduled flow with a trigger to trigger at a certain time every week. And then what it will do is it will post through the link to the group chat. Okay, so I'm just going to manually kick that off and I'm going to run that flow. There we go. I've run the flow. If I go back into the group chat, you can see that that's now posted right into the chat. So all I have to do there is go and grab that link. Boom. I could then go and start working on my loop component and then make any amends and then post it into the chat. So that's really, really cool. The big problem with Power Automate and using it is that the flows at this moment in time don't render the loop component. So what I mean by that is that if I'm in Microsoft Teams, I want to be able to have this within the flow so that when the flow runs, I see this here on the screen, that I actually see the loop component and not the link. If I was to copy and paste it in today, it would show, but the flow doesn't automatically do that. So that's the big limitation of working with bonding loop and flows at this moment in time. And in creating these flows with loop component links, we have to be aware of the different types of links that relate to a loop. We have the component link itself, and the component link is within Teams. It's right here. It's the one that's copied. That's the component link. But we also have the office.com link to the loop component as well. So if I was to open one of these up, and these are different things. So when you're creating your flows with your kind of loop links, you have to be very clear in your mind about, kind of what you're trying to do with the flow, and you have to decide on whether you're using the component link or whether you're using the office.com link. It's just something to point out. Moving on, okay, to the loop component in Outlook. This is now in public preview. It's not rolled out to all tenants. You want to make sure that you're in targeted within the Microsoft 365 admin portal. It's surfaced in my demo environment. When I kind of deployed it, I put it into targeted, and then it surfaced and it was there the next day. But of course, Microsoft, the way they roll things out is they roll things out globally to all tenants. It might not have gotten to you yet. So if it's not there today, then it should be there within the very near future. But creating loop components in Outlook is very similar to creating them in Teams. Let's just go and head into Outlook. So here I am. I create a new message. You can see that the loop component is right there. If I create that, again, I will be given a list. It's even got one difference from Teams, which is Q&A. Let's just create that bulleted list here. So I'm going to create it, and I'm going to call this bullet list 3. Item 1, item 2, item 3, item 4. I can have that as part of an email. Hi, Vesku. Let's work on this together. Surface it for me in Teams. Best. The send. Okay. I'm going to send it to Vesku. So I've sent that off now. That will go to Vesku. Vesku will go and pick that up. He can then go and copy the loop component, okay? And then what he can do, come into Teams, and we can copy and surface that loop component right here. Okay, so in terms of using those loop components, it's very similar to using them in Microsoft Teams in terms of a user experience. We can create the loop components right there in the app. In terms of interoperability with Teams, we would create the loop component, we would take that component link, and we would copy and paste that into the other application. In addition, in Outlook, as said, let me just go back into Outlook. It has more loop components than what Teams does. So when I went to create that loop component, you will see it's got the Q&A loop component. Q&A is great kind of, if we think about, if we use Q&A within chats or within emails or within Office, our Office applications, within documents, that's a big use case for a loop component. So we can collaborate on that together in real time and add more questions and answers. And anywhere that we need to surface those Q&A and answers, we don't have to kind of start out and rewrite them again. We can simply take that loop component and insert it where we need to. In terms of the prerequisites today with Outlook, we need to have an Exchange Online license, and it's only available in the web. This is probably its biggest drawback right now today, is that we have to think about how many people use Outlook and the kind of the ratio of the desktop to the web. Lots of people don't use Outlook web today, or they only do so when they need to use it. They typically use the desktop or they use their mobile device. So it's going to be kind of, maybe could be several months down the road before loop components appears in all of the Outlook clients. So again, we keep coming back to this story of things being unfinished. So the use cases in Outlook at this time is very, very narrow. Like Teams, they don't work outside the org. If we email the loop component to somebody outside our own organization, they will not render. They will not render in the desktop or the mobile client. They just simply won't work. To add to the confusion, the Fluid file is stored in a completely different folder than the ones created in Teams. So get this, if I go into Outlook and I go to my top level, I think, oh, I've created a loop component. They're going to appear in Microsoft Teams chat. I'm not going to see it there. I'm going to see it in the attachments folder instead. So what that means is that loop components are not only getting put into personal storage, they're getting put into different folders as well, which splits up where they're all located. Now, you could say that we could find these all through office.com and do so on a search. That's all well and good. But they're located, the files are located in different places. If they get brought into Microsoft Teams, into actual channels, does that mean that loop files, the fluid files, are going to be stored within SharePoint? Are they going to be kind of split up everywhere where there are different kind of storage areas? That remains to be seen, but it could be a problem. It could be complex for the day-to-day user to locate their fluid files. And then Outlook suffers from the same problems as Teams in that you can only create the loop components in Outlook. You can't create them in Office.com, and you can't format them. They don't support HTML or Markdown. In terms of the interop between Teams and Outlook, this is also problematic. Why? Because whilst it's simply cool that I can get the link from Outlook or from Teams and copy it somewhere else, and that loop component renders, you and I will find this process, very simple, straightforward. We're used to copy and paste and write, but you have to think about the average user in the organization, and if they're going to want to kind of copy and paste between different applications. Imagine when loop components extend to Whiteboard and Office apps. Do you want to spend a lot of your time copying and pasting? Now, Teams and Outlook has an ability to share with each other. If I go into Microsoft Teams, on a message, I can click the 3 buttons and I can share to Outlook. In addition, if I go into Outlook, I can also as well share that. Let's just go and wait for this to render. I can also share that to Microsoft Teams. So I have options to do so there as well. If I click on these, I think it's here, I can share to Teams. But if I share by this functionality, again, the loop component doesn't render. All it does is it shows as an actual link that goes to office.com. So the functionalities that kind of in your mind that say, if I click this button, it should share the loop component between Outlook and vice versa, that doesn't work. So we're kind of building up this picture that it could really be difficult for users to get to work with this on a day-to-day basis. Now, as we finish off, okay, we're going to look at kind of compliance and some of the benefits and challenges. In terms of compliance, hey, look, in large organizations, we tend to have security and compliance officers. We don't just put things into our environment or turn them on, right? Mind you, that can apply for SMB as well as enterprise. But how well does Loop kind of stack up, when it to security and compliance and identity today? From a retentions perspective, Loop is supported. You can have both policies and labels, and they can apply because Loop is housed within OneDrive. And I'm sure that if Loop components are stored within SharePoint, it will also be a big tick in the box from a retention perspective. In terms of search, Loop components will show in a content search. They will also be visible on the audit log. But the problem is that if you're doing a content search, you're doing an e-discovery, it will only show you the fluid file and where it's located. You won't be able to actually see into the fluid file to see the content. Because you can't see the content, also as well, it's not supported from a sensitivity labels or a DLP perspective. Now, sensitivity labels are important because we put them to sensitive information to stop them potentially being accessed by people that we do not want them to access. The same with DLP. We have DLP policies in place to stop sensitive information escaping and having data leakage inside the environment. Imagine in that Loop component, if you typed out a load of credit card numbers and then put that into Microsoft Teams, DLP would not catch it. That would go straight through, and the other person, might be able to open that up, get those credit card numbers, and you could be in breach of GDPR. That could potentially be worse if Teams opens up to federated or external users and still does not have this DLP functionality in place. So, Loop components, great for productivity. We can see how this works inside our organization, but some question marks remain over security and compliance. Summing up with the benefits and the challenges, I think hopefully I've tried to capture it, within the last kind of 25, 30 minutes. Great for collaborating in the flow of the work. If we want to have a quick list or a quick task list, or we want to work on a paragraph together collaboratively within Teams or within Outlook, within the flow of our work, if one of us wants to use Teams and one of us wants to use Outlook, we can do so because we can surface that loop component anywhere. So it's about how people want to work and collaborate together. In addition, we can have content that can exist in all our applications at the same time. These are assets that we can use and make repeatable time and time again. But also as well, when we get those pages and when we get those workspaces in the future, we will be able to structure all of these loop components together. We will be able to manage them far more kind of in line with how we manage our assets. So loop will give us structured assets. Maybe not today, but in the future, moving down the line. But that is the problem. The app is immature, it's in its early days. This is a new way of working. We're working with atomic components across different applications. We have to get used to this, let alone the average user. It's not a full experience. 2/3 of it do not exist. It's not rolled out across the whole Microsoft 365 stack. It's taken 9 months to get into Outlook. So what about going through all of the applications? Are we still going to be here 5 years' time and it's still not completed its rollout? And as I explained, Loop lacks the kind of compliance functionalities. It might get vetoed before it even goes into an environment because it's not supported with things like sensitivity labels and DLP. The final slide on the insights, just from working with this for some time. First of all, people like Vesco and myself, we'd advise, some testing, maybe inside a test environment rather than putting it straight into production. You don't necessarily want to have this turned on to 3,000 users, particularly when it hasn't got kind of full compliance control. You might want to test it out before you put it into your production environment. Secondly, you're going to need to have some training, even if it's watching a session like this, about what loop components are and what are the limits, because otherwise you're going to get a ton of questions from users. Potentially you could get complaints that feeds back in your direction. What is important is that you track your loop components, because pages and workspaces don't exist today. How are we going to search and how are we going to keep hold of our loop components? Because I've created 2 just within this session. I could have 2 dozen, 3 dozen, 4 dozen. How am I going to keep track of that? There are some ways that we can do this. Number one, everything we can search for in office.com. We've got a filter specifically for loop components, as I've shown today. We could keep all of those loop components, the URLs, in a list. So we could actually track the ones that we've created and what it is that they're useful. As shown, we could pin them to the top of our conversations. In Teams as well, we've also got the ability to bookmark. So for example, here I am within Microsoft Teams. I just want to simply save this message and bookmark it. Then if I click on, is it the 3? Where is it? There we go. If I click on my avatar and I click saved, I will have direct links to my loop components. That's another way that we could potentially track and keep an eye on the loop components. But because there's no central organizing function, we need to have that gap or have something to fill that gap as we're using them today. Last but not least, we need to be able to translate these clearly to our users. So this is really an adoption point. We need to figure out what it's for and what it isn't. We don't want them to be used and abused. We don't want loops to be used for everything, especially when we have defined applications in the Microsoft 365 environment. These are not, kind of cheap alternatives for apps elsewhere. We often get that conversation with Planner and Microsoft Project. Planner is not going to do everything that Project's designed to do, because Microsoft just intends it as a, kind of a lightweight version of what Project is. And that's the same with loop components than say with something like Microsoft Lists. Loop components are never going to be what Lists is today. It's only ever going to be a lightweight version. So we have to translate that and set our expectations appropriate with our users. So returning to the outcomes, we've had a recap on the vision for Microsoft Loop. We've looked at loop components and Teams. Because of the kind of limited time today, we've only really kind of had a brief demo of those loop components and Teams. And then what we did is we looked at the kind of the use cases and the limits of those loop components today. We then moved on to loop components in Outlook. The experience is very similar in Outlook than it is in Teams, but loop components in Outlook suffers from the same kind of problems that loop components in Teams and the shortcomings that we have today. In addition, it's only available in the web. How many people use the web as opposed to using the desktop? all these limitations means is that people might not get around to using Microsoft Loop. If we look at it from a compliance and from a benefits and challenges, I think the potential is there. This could be an absolutely amazing application. But at this moment, while some organizations, a lot of them will think that it's just hype, and because of the shortcomings, they may, it might be the best app you've never used in Microsoft 365. So I hope you've got a kind of better understanding if your organization is ready to use them, or to make a decision about whether you want to use them today or wait until it's slightly more matured coming down the line. Just want to thank you for today. And, if there's any questions, I hope you've enjoyed the session. You can keep in contact with me through many different ways, email, or connect with me over Twitter or LinkedIn, or see my blog, as Sharon's kindly said, at microsoft365pro.co.uk. I'm doing a slightly longer kind of session with a few more demos kind of later on this month, but otherwise, I'm having fun across the autumn, like I'm sure you will. So Sharon, have we got any questions for today?
I think they were all mine, Chris, and I think you've actually answered a majority of them. And it is things like, it's great that it's come to Outlook, but just Outlook Online, and how the power of that component, and there is a lot of power in that component, is when I can pop it in a Word document, or when I can stick it in a PowerPoint presentation, and exactly as you're saying, I can maintain whatever that component is to me, whether that's the company address all the way through to, like you say, the marketing plan that's developing. I'm kind of getting the vibe from you that it's been released before it's ready. Is that kind of where you think we're at?
I think that we have to kind of approach these things with caution. And on the one side of me, I love the innovation, I love what this can be. I kind of use it with a few people inside my own organization, and they completely get it. And we use it within teams quite often. When we're doing sprints, we use kind of basic flows, as we kind of demonstrated today, to review that. So we review it periodically every week. I've got a blog up on that's about what I call Floopin, which is different scenarios for using flows with loops, because there's several different scenarios which they can apply to. I think for people that, to use a kind of a Microsoft marketing term, for people that are what's called digital optimists, for people that like to be in that kind of first in with the technology, this is going to appeal to them very much so, and they're going to embrace this and they're going to love it. But for people that they want to see the whole finished product, they want to be able to see it where they work, because some people work in Office a lot, some people work in SharePoint, for example. They're going to want to see it put there, as opposed to Teams or to Outlook. So unless it kind of reaches how people work, I think there's always going to be people that hold off on that. The fact that it has no organizing principle as well, and that these are just components that are scattered throughout the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, I think that's going to be difficult for people. Then they're going to forget about them, and then what you're going to have is a lot of fluid files that are kind of stored in your OneDrive or elsewhere around the ecosystem. And from a compliance perspective too, I can see IT admins going, oh my god, I can't allow 3,000 users to start creating these fluid files all over the place. And somebody might put kind of sensitive information, and it might get somewhere where it shouldn't be. So the lack of kind of control from a security and compliance, I think that's going to be a bit of a problem too.
I agree with you. I think it's got that perfect imbalance of very cool versus very uncontrollable.
Exactly, and we have to distinguish, about, people are going to make a judgment call on that. Some people are say, look, and that's why it's got the picture of the slot machine on the kind of the front. Some people are going to take a chance on it, and they're going to say, look, we're all in on this. We want to be the first in. And some people are going to say, whoa, it's probably a bit too immature for us, and they're going to say, well, it's the hype. And when they kind of showed that at Microsoft Ignite, that's why the reason I put the marketing video up on the front. When we saw it, we was like, oh my god, this is like fully formed, this is. But what they were showing is they were showing a vision of the future as it exists sometime during 2023 or maybe even early 2024, and we're not there yet.
And I think, it's going to be great when we get to that point, and perhaps they only can launch it with that interoperability that we're looking for when they've addressed the governance concerns. And that's going to be great. But I take your point. This was launched like 9 months ago. And yeah, okay. People like you and I are going to go and play with it because it's there, right? And I do think it's fascinating, and I like the way that it's going. And this was a great summary. I mean, I learned stuff today. I even went and I was playing while you were talking, bringing it up in SharePoint, and I noticed we can include it in To Do. I didn't know that until I just clicked that button. That's kind of cool. But like you say, it's not, because it's just a link. So
I think it's going to be explosive. I mean, that kind of, when those flows can render those loop components, so that the loop components automatically show as opposed to showing the links, for example, that is going to be an extremely powerful functionality in order to be able to do, because when it kind of comes through, I'll have the loop component that's sitting there right in front of me that I can start kind of editing it, and we can all start editing it collaboratively. In addition, when it comes into Teams channels, for example, and we can switch it back between private chats and Teams channels, there are so many compelling functionalities. But then sometimes we forget that Teams was like that. There was a time where Teams didn't have breakout rooms, and it didn't have kind of private channels, and it didn't have that kind of killer functionalities that we see today. It didn't have Power Platform integration. Do we remember those days? And we couldn't think about that now, but that is where kind of loop components are. They're missing these big kind of gaps, these chunky things. We come back in a year's time and it's going to be a very different world in this space.
Yeah, I do agree. And it is very exciting to see what it can do. I take your point there also, Sancho. Sancho's put in the chat there that while that's going to be great, you still end up with a single source of the truth issue, in that, somebody then interfering with your presentation saying, well, my loop's more up to date than your loop. You know what I mean? So we're kind of back to that. But I think that will always exist with fluidly changing data. So yeah, there's some really good points, Chris, and I like that was a great summary of actually technically where we're at, rather than just the dream, right?
One of the good things and one of the compelling, so Sancho, makes a brilliant point on that, about the single source of truth, because somebody will say, well, if these can be kind of changed on the fly, that means is that we could get like the perfect paragraph of text, and somebody comes along and just makes one change and then kind of screws it all up, as it were. We have got version control because they're stored in Outlook, and I would imagine it's the same if they were stored in SharePoint. So if, for example, here in the loop component, what we can do, is go to the version history, and we see all the different versions of the loop component, so that for every iteration of it, we have the version history that's right there, and that we can make sure that we're using, as it were, the latest version. Or if it looks different, we can revert back to a previous version if we want.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because if you imagine that you put out, so say you've got a loop component that is something ubiquitous, or maybe like your rate card, for example, and you're putting it in every contract that you're putting out there, you don't want to be changing that back at base and it changed everybody's historical document. Do you know what I mean? So we've got to think about the things that do need to be dynamically live and updated, and the things that really don't. So maybe that's kind of the point of taking a version of that and putting it statically into a document or an Excel instance. That makes sense as to why that's actually taking a bit more time to be delivered than anything else.
Absolutely. And in that blog as well, that Flooping blog, that one of the because they're stored within OneDrive, and again, I think that this is probably going to be the same when they go into, because I think they're going to be probably put into SharePoint when they go into Teams channels. You can set notifications for if somebody kind of amends the loop component. So if it's been kind of modified and stuff like that, you can trigger from Flow a notification to say that file has been modified. So you can see that it's actually, so you can set up alerts on that. The only thing is that, you have to kind of put this in the context of people that are not us. So me and you would, Sharon, and I'm sure Sancho would, and all the people on this call would. But if I've got like the finance guy in my organization or the CEO, they're not going to want to be doing this stuff. They're going to just want something that works without all the intricacies of doing these things, without kind of copy and pasting. So I think that, again, we have to kind of be aware of the audience. The audience is going to be a big consideration when we're thinking about whether we want to kind of go ahead with loop components or not. I didn't want this session to be kind of Microsoft bashing or anything like that. what I would, what I guess what I'm kind of trying to say is that all these different kind of reactions to it of where it is. And I don't think we should hide behind it. I think we should say, look, here's where the gaps are. We can see that we're on the road to really something amazing, but it's not going to be for everyone at this current time.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of in keeping with the session that we designed today. So looking at kind of, Power Pages, they're not even GA yet, right? So, and also the metaverse, we don't know how all of this is going to flesh out. But as techies, we want to have a look at it. We want to have a play with it. We want to, kind of make some conjecture as to where Microsoft is going with this stuff. And all of it is in a really cool direction. It's just how is that actually going to realize that, it's fun for me to sit and think about those things. I don't know about anybody else, but
absolutely. Do you know what? We're on that kind of journey with Microsoft going along and stuff. I remember the day kind of 10, 15 years ago, a lot of our organizations are kind of, stuck at point in time applications such as Exchange or SharePoint, and they never changed from one year to the next. It was also slow, and it was, we become like the experts, know every granular detail about this because it never changed, right? We're in a much more dynamic world now, and whilst the pace of change is faster and while some things are unfinished, they're still very exciting in terms of being able to see the development. And yeah, there's going to be a little bit of pain involved in that, but you and I know, that it's better to be on that journey at the forefront of what we're doing rather than stuck in a world where nothing really happens,
Yeah, we need stuff to play with. We absolutely do. Okay, so let's finish your session just with a quick mention of Metaverse One, because we couldn't not.
Yeah, of course. So Metaverse One, okay, is a conference as well. Hey, look, it's all just kind of in the name to do with the metaverse. This is a conference that's from all the organizers. There was a Teams Nation. We all decided that we'd kind of taken Teams Nation as far as we could in terms of Microsoft Teams, so it got bigger and bigger and bigger. I think the last time around, I think we had like 190 speakers and 150 sessions or something like that, and it got absolutely crazy. We had over 3,000 people that attended to the event, and that event just got extremely unwieldy. It took like 3/4 of a year to put it all together. The people who do the Scottish Summit or the South Coast Summit are the same. They, it takes up an incredible amount of time, but you know what? There's a lot of kind of Teams conferences and stuff these days, and they're great conferences. You got Comsverse, for example. That's a great conference. You got Scottish Summit. You've got South Coast Summit. We want it to be very much kind of skating towards where the puck is going. And it's not like we love Teams. We still do lots of stuff, blogging, tech community, all that kind of stuff. We're still Teams MVPs, but at the same time, we kind of want to be involved in that exciting part, in that new technology and the kind of the undiscovered, there's a whole world of stuff that's waiting for us over there, and we don't want to get left behind. We want to get kind of be put in that world, and sometimes we look at everyone in the Power Platform community. It's so exciting because it's kind of constantly evolving, and there's new parts of the Power Platform that are coming out all the time, or new functionality. And it's the same with Metaverse. I mean, Metaverse is like another iteration of the internet, right? That's what it's going to be. So we're going to get a load of speakers. We're going to talk on technical subjects. We're going to talk upon business subjects. The one that I'm doing is on ethics. It's not kind of purely based upon Mesh from Microsoft Teams. It's got a little bit of a broader scope on that. But as kind of Mesh in Microsoft Teams comes into the market and develops, I'm sure we'll be seeing more sessions in that direction. This time around on the 7th, it's very much the core of the conference. So it's going to be a small, intimate affair. It's going to be kind of maybe 200 to 400 attendees. Everyone's welcome to come along if they go and have one session, if they go and see kind of all the sessions. Caruana is doing one of the keynotes, Puna Kaufman. We've got the guys at Hololux that are over, so Christian Glessner and Saeed Saim. Ivana Tilker is speaking. Chirag is speaking. So, we've got a lot of friends, so it's going to be a kind of very intimate affair. And of course, Sharon, as usual, you are back as well to help us kind of do all these things.
Yeah, I mean, it's you're always at the bleeding edge there, Chris, and that's what I really like. Why do the same conference as everybody else? Let's do something completely different. And
do you know what? I don't know where we're going to go after this. So a couple of years we'll do Metaverse, and then God knows what else we'll be focusing on after that. But
that's good not to know, right?
Hey, look, the Loop conference when it comes into all these applications, right?
Superb. Okay, Chris, you and I could chat all day, and sometimes we do. So it's been great to have you back on the user group. Thank you so much for coming along. I would encourage everybody to come along to Metaverse One. Let's talk about some stuff that we don't know quite how it's going to flesh out, and that's really what the conference is going to be about. So please do come along. We'd love to see you there. And again, thank you so much, Chris, for coming along, and all our speakers today, Sancho, James, and of course, the screen popped out there. And of course, do come along to the next session. And sorry, I didn't mention Vescu there. Vescu also speaking today. Do come along to the next session. We'll start to advertise that fairly soon. We're looking to perhaps do an M365 collab day or something like that in the future. So that'll be really good. We'll also take these sessions and put them up on YouTube for you so that you can access them anytime you want and hear Chris and I at any time can looking at the future. Perhaps we'll look back on it in 2 years, Chris, and see if it actually all came true. That'd be great. So Absolutely. Thank you again for everybody for coming. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy the content that we're putting out. Please do come along and join the community. If you search for Cambridge Power Platform User Group, do come along and join as a member, and then you'll get notifications as things go live on YouTube and for the next event. But thank you ever so much, everybody, for coming along. It's great to be part of a community where technology is constantly evolving, not just around the Power Platform and our use of the Power Platform, but everything else that's going to come in and interact with the Power Platform too. So thanks to all of our speakers. Thanks to you all for attending. See you next time. So Absolutely. Thank you again for everybody for coming. Thank you for listening. And we hope you enjoy the content that we're putting out. Please do come along and join the community. If you search for Cambridge Power Platform User Group, do come along and join as a member, and then you'll get notifications as things go live on YouTube and for the next event. But thank you ever so much, everybody, for coming along. It's great to be part of a community where technology is constantly evolving, not just around the Power Platform and our use of the Power Platform, but everything else that's going to come in and interact with the Power Platform too. So thanks to all of our speakers. Thanks to you all for attending. See you next time.